When Michael Jordan knocked on that door, he had no idea his whole world was about to stop. Not the basketball world, not the championship world, not the world of 6 rings and a billion-dollar brand, and a name that every human being on Earth with access to a television already knew. His real world, the one that existed before any of that. The one that started in a neighborhood in Wilmington, North Carolina, when he was 14 years old and skinny and not yet famous and not yet great. Just a boy with big hands and a bigger laugh who one summer afternoon stopped dribbling a basketball and forgot to pick it up because he saw a girl reading a book by a chain link fence. Her name was Loretta Mae Sims, and she was the first person Michael Jordan ever loved. They were together for 3 years. Not Hollywood years. Real ones. Library Tuesdays and long phone calls and walking home the long way because neither of them wanted the evening to end. 3 years of the kind of closeness that does not ask for an audience and does not need one. The kind that becomes part of how you see everything else. And then one Friday night in November of 1980, it was over. One conversation. One truth told too late. One door closed on a November sidewalk. And then 20 years of silence. No calls, no letters, no contact of any kind. Michael Jordan rose from a skinny kid in Wilmington to the greatest basketball player the world had ever seen. And the whole time, in some quiet corner of him that championships could not reach, he carried the memory of a girl with a library book and a patient voice and eyes the color of dark honey. Then one October morning, going through boxes from his late mother's house, he found something at the bottom of a cardboard box labeled in her handwriting. A letter, written in Loretta's hand. A letter his mother had kept in a shoebox for over 20 years, waiting for the right moment, the way only a mother knows how to wait. He read it standing in the cold outside a storage unit, and when he finished, he stood completely still for 45 minutes. Because what that letter said changed everything he thought he knew about that last Friday night. About what Loretta had been carrying alone. About what had been left unsaid between them for 2 full decades. 3 weeks later, with no warning and no announcement, Michael Jordan got into a car with just his assistant and drove 2 hours down a North Carolina back road to a quiet street called Camellia Drive. He did not call ahead. She did not know he was coming. He walked up the porch steps of a small white house with flower boxes full of marigolds and a wind chime made of painted shells. He knocked on the door. And what opened on the other side of that door, what he found inside that house, what Loretta told him sitting across a kitchen table over 2 cups of coffee, and what Michael did in the 6 days that followed, shocked everyone who heard it. Not just the people who knew them. Everyone. This is not a story about basketball. It is not a story about fame or money or the second chances that rich and powerful people can buy for themselves. This is a story about a boy who sat down in the grass next to a girl without being invited. About what 3 years of real love looks like when it is made of library books and bicycle rides and walking home slowly on purpose. About a letter kept in a shoebox for 20 years by a mother who believed some things need time before they are ready to be found. And it is a story about what one man chose to do when he finally looked back, after 20 years of walking forward, and saw what he had left behind. Stay with us through this whole story, because the ending is not what you think it is, and when you get there, it will hit you somewhere you were not expecting. Let's start right where the title promised we would. It was a Tuesday morning in October. The sky over a quiet neighborhood in North Carolina was the color of old silver. The oak trees along the street had gone gold at the edges, like someone had touched them with a warm finger. The air smelled like wood smoke and cut grass, the kind of morning that feels like it belongs to ordinary people, living ordinary lives, in a place the rest of the world has never heard of. A black SUV rolled slowly down a street called Camellia Drive. It had no logo on the side, no flashing lights, no camera crew hanging out the window. The tinted windows gave nothing away. To anyone watching from a porch swing or a kitchen window, it looked like a car that had maybe taken the wrong turn off the highway and was now moving slowly, looking for a house number it wasn't sure about. But inside that car sat one of the most famous human beings who has ever lived on this earth. Michael Jordan, 6 feet 6 inches tall, 6 NBA championship rings, 5 most valuable player awards. A man whose face had been on cereal boxes and billboards and the shoes of every kid who ever bounced a basketball in a driveway, and closed their eyes and believed, just for 1 second, that they could fly. He sat in the back seat of that SUV wearing a plain gray hoodie and dark jeans. No jewelry, no sunglasses. His hands were folded in his lap like a man going to church. Or maybe, and this is closer to the truth, like a man going to confession. His assistant, a quiet young man named Devlin Marsh, sat up front behind the wheel. Devlin had worked for Michael for 3 years. He had arranged private jets and cleared hotel lobbies. He had once stood between Michael and a crowd of 800 screaming fans outside a hotel in Paris without breaking a sweat. He was unshakable. That was his whole job. Being unshakable. But this morning, Devlin was nervous in a way he had never been before, because Michael had not told him why they were here. He had simply come downstairs that morning, before the sun was fully up, while the house was still dark and quiet, and said, "Devlin, I need to go somewhere. Just you and me. No security team, no phones going out." Devlin had nodded. That was his job. You nod and you drive. But as they turned onto Camellia Drive and the SUV slowed to a crawl, Devlin glanced in the rearview mirror and saw something on Michael Jordan's face that he had never seen there in 3 years of working for him. Fear. Not the focused, locked-in look from before a big game. Not the cold, competitive fire that former teammates talked about in every documentary. The look that said, "I will not lose." This was something softer than that. Something older. Something that went all the way back before championships, before glory, before any of the things that had made Michael Jordan into a legend. This was the face of a man who was not sure he should be here, who was not sure he deserved to be. The car stopped in front of a small white house with a porch. There were flower boxes under the front windows, spilling over with late-season marigolds the color of an October sunset. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. A wind chime made of small painted shells turned slowly in the cool morning air, making almost no sound at all. Michael stared at that house for a long moment without speaking. Then he said very quietly, "She doesn't know I'm coming." Devlin said nothing. Michael said, "I haven't spoken to her in 20 years. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old. The creases had gone soft from being folded and unfolded many, many times. He looked at it for just a moment. Then he put it back. He said, "Wait here." He opened the car door. He walked up the porch steps. He knocked. "Stay with us, because what opened on the other side of that door will change how you see everything." To understand why Michael Jordan knocked on that door, why he drove 2 hours in silence on a Tuesday morning and stood on a stranger's porch with a folded letter in his pocket, you have to go back, way back, back before the championships, before the sneakers with his name on them, before the commercials and the billboards and the cartoon movie where he played basketball with Bugs Bunny, before the magazine covers, before the arenas full of screaming people, before any of the things that turned a boy from North Carolina into something the world had never quite seen before. You have to go all the way back to a city called Wilmington, North Carolina in the late 1970s. Wilmington in those years was not a glamorous place. It was a working city beside the Cape Fear River, where people got up early and stayed out late and did honest things with their hands. The city smelled like salt water and pine resin and the grease from the diner on Market Street where a plate of eggs, toast, and orange juice cost 95 cents. The summers were thick and wet, the kind that push the air down heavy and make everything slow, like the whole world is trying to catch its breath. Michael Jeffrey Jordan was born on February 17, 1963. He grew up in a modest house with 2 parents who loved him fiercely and 4 brothers and sisters who competed with him for everything. The last biscuit at dinner, the remote control for the one television in the living room, the most praise at the kitchen table, the loudest laugh in any room they shared. His mother, Dolores, was a woman built from iron and kindness in equal measure. She believed the way some people believe in religion, that a child with idle hands will always find trouble. So her children were never idle. They had chores and church and schoolwork, and the expectation delivered clearly and without drama that they would rise. Not just get by. Rise. His father, James, was a man who believed in the power of doing things right. Not fast. Right. He would take young Michael out to the backyard in the evenings and talk to him about what it meant to be a man. Not in the abstract way that sounds pretty but means nothing, but in the specific, practical way of a father who has worked hard all his life and wants his son to understand exactly what that costs and what it builds. James used to say, "Greatness is not given to anybody, son. It gets built. One brick at a time. In the moments nobody is watching." Michael listened. He tucked those words somewhere deep and carried them. But here's something most people forget about the young Michael Jordan. He was not always the best. He was not always the one who made the room stop. When he was a sophomore in high school, he tried out for the varsity basketball team at Laney High School and was cut. He did not make it. He was told he was not ready. He was 15 years old. He walked home that afternoon and went to his room and cried, not in front of anyone, alone, with the door shut. His mother, Dolores, heard him. She stood outside the door for a moment. She did not knock. She did not rush in with comfort and soft words. She stood there and she let him feel it all the way through because she understood something that takes most people a lifetime to learn. That pain you run from stays with you forever, but pain you sit with long enough becomes something different on the other side. It becomes fuel. The following year, Michael grew 4 inches. He practiced before school and after school and on weekends. He outworked every other person on the court, not because someone told him to, but because the cut had lit something in him that did not go out. He made the team. He started. He flew. But this story is not about basketball. Not yet. This story is about what happened before the flying, before any of it mattered to anyone but him. When Michael was 14 years old in the deep middle of the summer of 1977, He was just a tall, skinny kid with hands that seemed slightly too big for the rest of him and a grin that arrived half a second before he meant to show it. He spent that summer doing what 14-year-olds in Wilmington did, riding bikes up and down the neighborhood, finding ways around homework, and spending long afternoons at the public basketball courts on 6th Street. The courts were concrete and loud and surrounded on 3 sides by a chain-link fence that rattled when the wind came through. Older boys played fierce pickup games in the afternoons, and younger kids like Michael gathered on the outside and watched and pretended they were not learning everything they saw. On the open 4th side of the court, a patch of grass stretched out toward the sidewalk. Families sometimes spread blankets there on weekends. Younger kids without games sat in small groups and talked about everything and nothing. It was there, on that patch of grass, on a heavy Thursday afternoon in late July, that 14-year-old Michael Jordan stopped dribbling. The ball bounced once. Then it rolled away without him, because he had seen a girl. She was sitting on the grass with her knees pulled up to her chest, reading a book. She had cornrow braids pulled back with a yellow rubber band. She wore a white t-shirt with the sleeves cut off and red canvas sneakers with the laces loose. She was not watching the game. She was reading, head down, fully gone into whatever the pages held. And that somehow, more than anything else, was what made Michael stop. His friend Cedric walked up beside him, picked up the ball Michael had forgotten, and bounced it hard off Michael's shoulder. Michael didn't flinch. Cedric said, "You gonna go talk to her or just stand there looking simple?" Michael said, "I'm not looking like anything." Cedric said, "Yeah, uh-huh." Michael looked at the girl with the yellow rubber band in her braids one more time. He swallowed. And then, because he was, even at 14, someone who moved toward the things that scared him rather than away from them, he walked across the grass. He stopped beside her. He was blocking her light slightly. He said the only thing that came to him, "What are you reading?" She looked up. Her eyes were dark honey. She looked at him the way you look at something you haven't made up your mind about yet. She said, "Why do you want to know?" He said, "I don't know. I just asked." She considered him for another moment. Then she turned the book so he could see the cover. It was a library book, Stars and Constellations. She said, "I'm reading about Orion. He was a hunter." Michael sat down in the grass beside her without being invited. He said, "Tell me about him." And she did. And that was the beginning of everything. Loretta Mae Sims was not like any girl Michael had ever met before. That is what he would say about her years later in the rare, quiet moments he let himself talk about her at all. He would not dress it up. He would not reach for a fancy way to say it. He would simply say it like a fact that needed no arguing. The way you say the river runs south or the sky goes dark before a storm. She was not like any girl he had ever met before. Loretta had grown up 3 blocks from those basketball courts, in a small yellow house on Dewey Street with a screen door that made a sharp, satisfying slap every single time anyone walked through it. Her father, Randolph Sims, worked the overnight shift at the paper mill outside town and slept through the mornings. Because of this, the house had a specific kind of quiet during the daylight hours, the hushed, careful quiet of a place where someone is always sleeping and everyone else has learned to move gently around it. Her mother, Celeste, ran the household with a calm and steady hand that made everything look easy, even when it was not. Celeste Sims was a reader, not a casual reader, a devoted one. The kind of person for whom books are not a hobby but a way of surviving the world with your mind intact. The yellow house on Dewey Street was full of books. They stood in rows on wooden shelves Randolph had built along one wall of the living room. They were stacked on the kitchen table. They were piled on the floor beside the couch, in the space where most families kept a magazine rack. There were paperbacks jammed into the bathroom cabinet and hardcovers on the nightstand, and thin volumes of poetry tucked between cookbooks in the kitchen. Celeste believed with her whole heart that a book was the cheapest ticket to anywhere in the world. She had passed this belief to Loretta the way you pass down a recipe, not by sitting her down and explaining it, but simply by living it in front of her every single day until it became part of who Loretta was too. So Loretta read. She read science books and history books and novels set in cities she had never visited and countries she could only find on a map. She kept a small spiral notebook where she copied down sentences that hit her in a particular way, lines that made her feel as if the writer, dead maybe 100 years, had somehow looked ahead through time and written directly to her, through paper and ink and the strange miracle of language that outlasts the people who make it. At school, Loretta was quiet, not shy. There is a difference, and it mattered. She was not afraid to speak. She simply did not speak unless she had something worth saying. Her teachers described her year after year as an old soul. Her friends called her the one who actually listens, which is one of the rarest and most valuable things a person can be. She had no idea who Michael Jordan was on the afternoon he sat down beside her on that patch of grass. She had seen him around the courts before. You notice tall people. Your eyes just find them. She had registered him the way you register weather. Noted it, moved on. But when he sat down in the grass without being invited and looked at her library book, not with the half-interested look of someone trying to make a good impression, but with the genuine, unguarded look of someone who actually wanted to know, she decided he was worth a few minutes of her afternoon. She told him about Orion. She told him that Orion was a great hunter in the old Greek stories, so great and so proud that the gods themselves took notice. She told him that when Orion died, he was placed among the stars so that he would never be forgotten. She told him about Scorpius, the scorpion, Orion's enemy in the old stories, and how the gods in their wisdom or their mercy placed Scorpius on the exact opposite side of the sky so that the two would circle the earth forever and never meet. Michael listened the whole time. He did not interrupt. He did not try to steer the conversation toward himself. He sat in the grass with his long arms resting on his knees, and he just listened, which surprised her because most people she had found were only pretending to listen while they waited for their turn to speak. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So they're both just up there going around and never catching each other?" She said, "That's one way to put it." He said, "That's kind of sad." She tilted her head. She said, "Or kind of merciful. Depends on how you look at it." He looked at her sideways with an expression she could not quite name. Then he said, "You think about things weird?" She said, "Thank you." He laughed. It was a laugh too big for his body at 14. Sudden and full and completely unguarded, like a door being thrown open. It came out before he could do anything about it, and Loretta found herself smiling before she had decided to. That was the thing about his laugh. It didn't ask permission. It just arrived and took up the whole space and somehow made the space feel warmer for it. They stayed by that fence until the sun started dropping orange behind the rooftops, and the streetlights on 6th Street buzzed and flickered to life one by one. By the time Loretta stood up, brushed the grass off her jeans, and tucked her library book under her arm, something had shifted in the air between them. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to. Just the small, invisible shift that happens when two people who were strangers an hour ago are no longer strangers. After that day, they became the kind of friends that 14-year-olds become in the long middle of summer, which is to say, inseparable in the particular and urgent way of young people who have not yet learned how fast time moves and how little of it we get. They rode bikes to the public library every Tuesday morning, because Tuesday was when Loretta returned her books and chose new ones. Michael would drift through the aisles beside her and pull books off shelves at random and read the first sentence out loud in a low voice to see if it caught him. He had a theory, firm, completely unscientific, that you could judge any book entirely by its first sentence. Loretta told him that was ridiculous. He told her to prove it. She tried and could not quite, and so they kept doing it. Book after book, aisle after aisle, Tuesday after Tuesday, until the librarian, a small woman named Mrs. Audrey Fitch, who wore her glasses on a chain and had seen everything, started saving books she thought Michael might like. On some evenings when the August heat finally let go and the sky turned that specific shade of deep purple that belongs only to southern summer nights, they climbed up onto the flat roof of the equipment shed behind the courts and lay on their backs and looked at the sky. Loretta would point out constellations and tell him their names. Michael would try to remember them. He was bad at it. He got them wrong almost every time, swapping names, inventing new ones, calling things by completely the wrong word with the full confidence of someone who was right. She never laughed at him for it. She would say in her calm and patient way, "Close," or simply, "Try again." That patience, the specific quality of it, the way it had no edge to it, no condition attached, felt to Michael like something he had not known he needed until he was already inside it. By August, he was in love. He was 14 years old and he did not have the word for it yet, but he felt the shape of it clearly. He knew that when Loretta was not around, the day had less color in it. He knew that he played better basketball when he imagined she was watching. He knew that whenever something good happened, a clean move, a good grade, a moment of unexpected luck, the first thing he wanted to do was find her and tell her about it. He told Cedric one afternoon. Not directly. In the sideways, eyes down, ball-bouncing way that 14-year-old boys confess to things. Cedric said, "Yeah, man, I know." Michael said, "You knew?" Cedric said, "Everybody knows. You can't even dribble straight anymore when she's around." Michael threw the ball at his head, but he was smiling when he did it. And Cedric, to his credit, was smiling too. They were together for 3 years. From the summer of 1977 all the way through to the fall of 1980, Loretta Mae Sims and Michael Jordan were each other's first real love. 3 years does not sound like a long time when you say it out loud. But at 14, 15, 16, 3 years is practically a whole life. It is long enough for a person to become part of how you see everything else. And the love they had did not look like the love in the movies. There were no limousines, no red roses delivered to the door, no grand speeches made in the rain. In a neighborhood like Wilmington's 6th Street community, love looked different from all of that. It looked like bike rides taken slow on purpose just to make them last longer. It looked like phone calls on the kitchen telephone, the one with the cord so short you had to crouch down on the linoleum floor to talk comfortably, that stretched past 9 o'clock and got Michael's mother rapping on the wall twice before he said goodnight. It looked like folded notes passed through school hallways between classes, small enough to hide in a palm. It looked like shared lunches on the grass outside the cafeteria, sitting with their backs against the chain-link fence that had started everything. Comfortable enough in each other's company that silence was never awkward. It was just another way of being together. It looked like walking home the long way, every time, without ever having to say why. By the time Michael was 16, the world outside was starting to notice him. He had grown again, taller, broader through the shoulders, harder in the jaw. He had made the varsity basketball team the year after the devastating cut, and he was doing more than surviving on it. He was electrifying. Coaches who came to watch other players found themselves watching Michael instead. Older men at the courts, men who had played serious ball in their day and did not give out compliments easily, started asking which school he went to. His name was starting to travel ahead of him. But in Loretta's kitchen, on her porch steps, walking the long way home through the September streets, he was just Michael. Not the rising star, not the kid everybody was starting to talk about, just the tall, earnest, slightly reckless boy who still got constellation names wrong half the time and laughed too loud at his own jokes and actually listened, when she spoke. That was the thing about Michael that Loretta held onto through all 3 years. He listened. Not the way most people listen, with one eye on the door and their own next sentence already forming. He listened the way you read a book you care about. All the way in, nothing held back. Loretta had grown during those years too. She was 16 and already planning her future with the focused clarity of someone who had always known what she wanted and had simply been waiting to be old enough to go get it. In her house, college was never a maybe. Her mother Celeste had made that clear so early and so firmly that it had simply become the shape of the future, as given and as certain as the fact that the sun would come up. Loretta wanted to study astronomy, the real kind. Not just the stories and the names she had been collecting since childhood, but the actual science underneath them. The physics, the mathematics, the deep and complicated truth of what stars are and how they burn and what they scatter into the dark when they finally go out. She told Michael this one afternoon in October of 1979. They were sitting on the front porch steps of his house, the evening coming down cool and blue around them. Through the screen door behind them, they could hear his mother Dolores moving through the kitchen, the sound of a pot on the stove, the low hum of the radio. Loretta said she wanted to understand why stars die. Michael was quiet for a moment. He'd been looking at the street, at the way the last of the daylight sat gold on the tops of the oak trees. Then he said, "You're going to be famous one day, real famous." She laughed. She said, "You're the one people are talking about." He shook his head, not dismissing it. He knew people were talking, but this was different. He said, "I mean it, Loretta. You're going to do something that actually matters." She looked at him carefully. She had learned by then that Michael did not fill silence with words he didn't mean. When he spoke like that, slow, deliberate, with that stillness that came over him when something was important, he meant every word. She said quietly, "What if I mess it up?" He said, "You won't." She said, "You don't know that." He said, "I know you. That's the same thing." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. They sat like that until Dolores called him in for dinner, and neither of them wanted to be the first to shift. That was the shape of those 3 years. Not dramatic, not loud. Built from small moments stacked carefully on top of each other. The way a patient person builds something meant to last. His mother saw it clearly. Dolores Jordan was a woman who observed people the way a scientist observes weather. Quietly, thoroughly, drawing conclusions she trusted. One Saturday afternoon, after Loretta had gone home and the house had gone quiet again, Dolores sat across from Michael at the kitchen table and looked at him for a moment before she spoke. She said, "That girl is good for you." He said, "I know." She said, "Then you make sure you're good for her too." He said, "I'm trying." She folded her hands on the table. She said in the particular tone that meant she was saying something she needed him to remember. "Try harder. The ones worth keeping always need you to try harder." He nodded. He tucked it somewhere close. He believed at 17 that he was doing all right, that this was something solid, something that would hold through whatever came next. The scouts, the scholarships, the big roaring future that was starting to make itself visible just beyond the tree line. He believed Loretta would be there through all of it. He did not yet know what was coming. He did not yet know how fast one Friday night can change everything. It ended on a Friday night in November of 1980. Michael was 17. Loretta had just turned 17 the month before. For her birthday, he had made her a card. Not bought one, made one. He had no money of his own, and his mother had told him more than once that the things you make with your hands carry more weight than the things you pull off a shelf. So he had sat at the kitchen table with a folded piece of cardboard and a black marker and drawn stars across the front of it. They were not good stars. They were lumpy and lopsided and did not resemble any constellation Loretta had ever seen in any of her books. But inside, in his large and slightly unsteady handwriting, he had written, "Happy birthday. You're going to see the real ones up close one day, I know it." She had laughed when she read it. Then she had gone quiet in a way that meant something had landed exactly right. She kept that card. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First, the Friday in November. It had been a big week for Michael. College scouts were starting to circle. The word moving through Wilmington, through the courts, through the school hallways, through the conversations of men who watched basketball seriously, was that Michael Jordan was going somewhere. Not just somewhere. All the way. His coach at Laney High School had pulled him aside earlier that week and laid it out plainly. Division I programs were interested. Scholarships were possible. A future was taking shape that looked nothing like the Cape Fear River and the 95-cent breakfast at the diner on Market Street. Michael walked to Loretta's house that Friday evening, barely able to hold the feeling inside his chest. He was electric with it. Buzzing. He knocked on the door and she let him in, and he sat across from her at the kitchen table where her physics textbooks were open and her pencil was still in her hand. And he talked. He talked for 10 solid minutes without stopping. About the scouts, about the schools, about what it could become, about the size of the door that was starting to open. When he finally ran out of words, he was breathing fast. He looked at her across the table. Her face was doing something he could not read, a stillness that was not quite calm. She said, "Michael, I got in." He blinked. "Got in where?" She said, "The summer science program at Chapel Hill, the one I applied to in September." She held his eyes. "I got the acceptance letter today." He stared at her, and then he said, "And this is the part that mattered." He said, "Loretta, that's great." But he was half a beat slow. Just half a beat. A fraction of a second where his face did not catch up fast enough, where the shift from his own excitement to hers was visible in a way he could not hide. She heard it. She always heard things like that. She said quietly, "You forgot I applied." He said, "No, I knew I..." She said, "You forgot." He did not deny it again, because it was true. The past month had swallowed everything that was not basketball and scouting, and the feeling of his own future pulling at him like a current. He had forgotten. A thing that had meant everything to her had simply slipped from the front of his mind to somewhere he never checked. That alone might have been survived. People forget things. Couples hurt each other by accident and find their way back. The night might have ended with an honest apology and some carefully rebuilt trust, and both of them a little older for it. But that was not the only thing that happened that night. 20 minutes into the conversation, Loretta's friend Yolanda knocked and came through the front door the way close friends do, without ceremony, mid-sentence about something else. And in the casual, careless way of someone who assumed everyone already knew everything, Yolanda said something, a passing reference, a little joke about a party the weekend before, about Michael, about a girl named Portia Webb who was a senior and 18 and had been circling Michael for weeks like a hawk above a field. The room shifted. Loretta went very still. Yolanda looked between the two of them and understood immediately what she had done. She left quickly with her eyes down, and the door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded, in that kitchen, very loud. Loretta looked at Michael. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She simply asked him, in a flat and careful tone, if it was true. He told her the truth. All of it. That Portia had kissed him at the party. That he had stepped back and away. That it had lasted no more than 3 seconds and had meant absolutely nothing. He told her he had not told her because he had convinced himself there was nothing to tell. That it was already over before it began. He sat with his hands open on the table, the way a person sits when they are trying to show they are hiding nothing. She listened to every word. Then she stood up. She said in a voice that was completely level, and a level voice, he learned in that moment, is much harder to hear than a raised one. "I need you to go home, Michael." He said, "Loretta, please." She said, "Go home." He stood. He looked at her across the kitchen. He reached for something, a sentence, a word, anything that might open a door that he could feel swinging shut. He had always been good under pressure. He had always found something. He found nothing. He walked to the door. He stepped out into the November dark. He did not know, standing on that sidewalk with the cold pressing in around him, that he had just spoken his last real words to the most important person in his life. He did not know that when he came back the next morning and knocked, no one would answer, or the morning after that, or any morning that followed. He was 17 years old. He thought it was the kind of ending that could still be undone. He was wrong. Then came the years. And the years move the way years move when a person is being carried forward by something much larger than themselves. Fast and loud and full of motion. So full that there is almost no room left to look back. Michael Jordan enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1981. He was extraordinary from the start. Not just good, not just promising. Extraordinary. The kind of player that makes coaches go quiet in the middle of practice just to watch. He hit the shot that won the national championship as a freshman. A freshman. The whole country learned his name that night. Then came the NBA Chicago. The Bulls. The red uniform and the number 23 and those long, impossible legs that seemed to fold up and release like a spring, sending him into the air in ways that made grown men in press boxes put down their pens and just watch. He won Rookie of the Year. He won scoring titles. He lost in the playoffs and came back. He lost again and came back again. He built something out of those losses that no amount of winning could have made on its own. Then he won. 6 championships. 6. In a sport where 1 is enough to define a career and 2 makes you a legend, he became the most famous basketball player who had ever lived. His face was on cereal boxes and billboards in 40 countries. Children in places that had never seen a basketball court knew his name, his number, his silhouette. He was not just an athlete anymore. He was something the culture had made into a symbol of excellence, of will, of the idea that ordinary people from ordinary places could become extraordinary if they wanted it badly enough and worked hard enough and refused, absolutely refused, to accept the floor. And through all of it, through every championship and every endorsement and every roaring arena and every camera flash and every moment of his name being chanted by thousands of people at once, he carried something quiet inside him. It was not a wound exactly, it was more like a room he did not go into very often. A room he had shut the door on at 17, standing on a November sidewalk in Wilmington, and had mostly left shut in the years since. But the door was still there. He married in 1989. He had children. He tried to be present in the ways that mattered, though the machine of his career made presence difficult. He and his wife divorced in 2006 after many years of trying. He remarried later to a woman named Yvette, who had warmth and a steadiness about her that settled something in him he had not known was still unsettled. He was by every visible measure a man living a full life. But sometimes, on early mornings when the house was quiet and the light was that particular shade of gray that belongs to no specific season, he would think about Loretta. Not obsessively, not in a way that ate at him or kept him up at night. Just the way you think about certain things that happened a long time ago and left a mark so clean and permanent that you stopped noticing it was there. Until something small catches the light at a certain angle and suddenly you see it again, clear as the first day. He would think about the library on Tuesday mornings, about the roof of the equipment shed and the purple summer sky, about the specific sound of her voice when she was about to say something she had thought about carefully. That slight lowering, that gathering of words like she was choosing each one from a collection and only reaching for the right ones. He would think about the look on her face that last Friday night in November, the stillness of it, the level voice, "Please go home." He would think about his mother's words, which had stayed with him longer than almost anything else Dolores Jordan had ever said to him. The ones worth keeping always need you to try harder. He had not tried harder. He had been 17, and the world had been pulling him forward with both hands, and he had gone. Because that is what you do at 17 when the world pulls. You go. You tell yourself you will look back later, but later kept arriving and then passing, and the door to that room stayed shut, and the years kept moving fast. Until the fall of what would have been their 20th year of silence, until a storage unit in North Carolina, until a cardboard box labeled in his mother's handwriting, until a folded piece of paper he had never seen before, written in a hand he had not forgotten in 20 years. That changed the direction of everything. He read it once. Then he stood in the cold October air next to that open storage unit and did not move for a very long time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. He did not tell anyone what it said. That paper is the one you saw him reach for in the back seat of the SUV on Camellia Drive. We are getting close to what it said, but not yet. Not quite yet. Now let's talk about what Michael actually found in that storage unit, because we have been circling it long enough. You have been patient. You deserve the full picture. The storage unit was in Wilmington, North Carolina. Michael had rented it years before to hold boxes from his parents' old house. Things packed up after his father James was killed in 1993. Things that had been sitting in that dim metal room ever since, waiting for a day when Michael had the emotional strength to go through them. That kind of day is hard to schedule. You put it off for a month, then a year, then several years, and eventually the boxes become part of the furniture of your mind. Always there, always waiting, never quite the right moment. One October morning, he finally went. He unlocked the unit and rolled up the heavy metal door and stood in the dusty light looking at stacks of cardboard boxes, each one labeled in his mother's precise handwriting. Kitchen things, James's books, photographs, Michael's things, Wilmington. He started with that last one. He pulled items out one at a time. An old basketball game program from a Laney High School match, the paper gone soft and yellow. A report card from 7th grade with a note from his teacher that said, "Michael is bright but easily distracted," which made him breathe a short laugh into the cold air. A small plastic trophy from a recreation league. A little gold-painted man frozen mid-layup on top of a fake marble base. A photograph of him and Cedric at the courts. Both of them 14 and skinny and squinting into the sun, with the specific confidence of boys who believe the whole world is still ahead of them. He set each item on the concrete floor beside him, carefully, the way you handle things that belong to a time you cannot return to. Then his hands found a shoebox at the bottom of the larger box. It was old, the kind of flat shoebox that had once held a pair of Converse sneakers. The top was on straight, undisturbed. He lifted it and set it on his knees and took the top off slowly. Inside the shoebox were two things. The first was the birthday card he had made for Loretta, the one with the lumpy hand-drawn stars on the front, and his big, unsteady handwriting on the inside. He stared at it for a long moment. He had given it to her. He had watched her read it. He had seen her go quiet in the way that meant something had landed right. He had not known she had returned it. He had not known she had come to his mother. He sat with that information for a moment. Then he reached into the shoebox and took out the second thing. A letter, written on notebook paper, folded carefully into thirds, the creases sharp and deliberate. The folding of someone who wanted it to stay closed until the right person opened it. He unfolded it. The handwriting was Loretta's. He knew it the instant he saw it, the same way you recognize a voice before you see the face. Neat, slightly slanted, each letter formed with care. He read it. Here is what it held. Not the exact words, because those belonged to her alone, but the shape and the weight of it, which is what matters for this story. She wrote that she was not angry. She had been briefly after that Friday night, but anger, she wrote, burns fast and leaves something else underneath. And what was underneath in her case was not bitterness, but clarity. A clean, honest understanding of what had happened and why and what it meant. She wrote that she had loved him. She used the word without apology or decoration. She said what they had was real, that she knew it had been real, and that she hoped someday he knew it too. She wrote that she was going forward, to Chapel Hill, to college, to the stars she had always meant to study properly. She was not going to let a painful ending become a reason to stop moving. She had her mother's voice in her head and her own stubbornness in her bones, and she was going to be fine. More than fine. And she needed him to know that so he could stop feeling guilty, if he was feeling guilty, which she suspected he was because that was the kind of person he was underneath all the bravado. And then she wrote something he had not seen coming. She wrote that there was something she had not told him. Something she had found out 3 weeks before, that last Friday night in November. Something she had been carrying alone and had planned to tell him that evening before everything fell apart. She did not explain why the kiss had cut so deeply. She let the timing explain it. She had been going to tell him something important. She never got the chance. She wrote, "I am not telling you this to hurt you. I am telling you because honesty is the only way I know how to do things, even when it is hard, even when the moment for it has passed." And then she told him. She wrote it in 3 quiet sentences. Michael read those 3 sentences. He read the letter again from the beginning. Then he read those 3 sentences a 3rd time, slowly, as if making sure each word was doing what he thought it was doing. Then he sat down on the concrete floor of the storage unit in the October cold and did not move for 45 minutes. His phone buzzed once, a message from Devlin waiting outside. "Everything okay in there?" Michael did not answer. He was sitting with the size of what those 3 sentences meant. With what it said about the night he had walked away. With what 20 years of silence looked like now, from this new angle in this new light. He thought about a girl with a yellow rubber band in her braids, reading a library book about stars by a chain-link fence. He thought about his mother's words, which he had carried imperfectly for 20 years. The ones worth keeping, always need you to try harder. After 45 minutes, he folded the letter back along its 3 careful creases and put it in the pocket of his jacket, close to his chest. He stood up. He said quietly to the concrete walls and the stacked boxes and the cold October air, and no one in particular, "I need to find her." It took him 3 weeks to actually do it. 3 weeks. Let that sit for a moment. Michael Jordan, a man who had made impossible decisions in impossible moments without blinking. A man who had taken the final shot in championship games with the whole world watching, and his pulse barely above resting, took 3 full weeks to get in a car and drive 2 hours down a North Carolina road. Because this was not a championship game. This was something older than any of that. Something that lived in a part of him that competition and glory and the roar of a crowd had never been able to reach. And that part of him, the quiet, unguarded part that belonged to a 14-year-old boy sitting in the grass by a chain-link fence, did not move on command. He went home after the storage unit. He put the letter in the nightstand drawer beside his bed. He went about his days. He had meetings and calls and obligations and the steady machinery of a life as large as his, which does not pause simply because a man finds a folded piece of paper that rearranges something inside him. But the letter was always there, in the drawer, in his mind, in the particular quality of silence that filled the room on mornings when he woke before the sun. He thought about calling her first. He picked up his phone twice. Once in the evening after dinner, once early on a Wednesday morning, and found her number, which Devlin had written on a notepad, and stared at it. Both times he put the phone back down. The idea of hearing her voice before he could see her face felt like the wrong order of things. Like reading the last page of a book before the first. He could not explain it better than that. He thought about writing back. A letter felt right in theory. Meeting her letter with one of his own, paper for paper, handwriting for handwriting. But every time he sat down to try, the words came out wrong. Too formal. Too rehearsed. Too much like a man trying to manage the impression he made rather than simply showing up. He rejected that too. He asked Devlin to find her. This part was straightforward. Devlin was thorough and discreet, and had located harder things than one woman in North Carolina. He found her in 3 days. When Devlin came to him with the information, he delivered it the way he delivered all information, clearly, without editorializing, facts first. She was living in a small town not far from Wilmington. She was working at a small observatory and science education center she had helped build. She had spent the better part of her adult life studying astronomy. Michael went completely still when he heard that. Not from shock. He had always known she would do it. He had told her so himself on those porch steps in October of 1979. And he had meant every word. But knowing something and hearing confirmation of it 20 years later are two entirely different feelings, and the confirmation settled into him like something warm and heavy and bittersweet all at once. He asked Devlin the name of the observatory. Devlin told him, the Camellia Sky Center, on Camellia Drive. Michael was quiet for a moment, then he said, I need to go there, just you and me. No security. No one hears about this. Devlin nodded. He had learned long ago not to ask Michael Jordan why, when his voice had that particular tone of finality in it. 3 more days passed. Michael was not stalling. He was getting ready in the way that some things require. Slowly, privately, without announcement. Then one Tuesday morning in October, before the sun was fully up, he came downstairs in his gray hoodie and found Devlin already in the kitchen, with the car keys in his hand. Michael looked at him. Devlin said nothing, just held up the keys. Michael said, Let's go. They drove 2 hours through the back roads of North Carolina. Michael did not play music. He did not look at his phone. He watched the fields and the tree lines and the small sleeping towns slide past the window, and he kept his hand in his jacket pocket, resting lightly on the folded letter. When the SUV turned onto Camellia Drive and slowed, he did not hesitate anymore. He opened the door, he walked up the steps, he knocked, and the door opened. The person who answered the door was not who he expected. This is important. Pay attention to this detail. The door did not open to reveal Loretta Mae Sims. It opened to reveal a girl. A teenager. She stood in the doorway with one hand still on the door handle, looking at him the way a person looks at something they have not decided about yet. Calm, unhurried, without any of the performance that most people put on when a stranger knocks. She was tall, genuinely tall in a way that was not awkward, but simply a fact about her. The way height is a fact about certain people who have grown into it cleanly. She had dark eyes set in a steady face and a pencil tucked behind her left ear. The kind of detail that says this person was in the middle of something before you interrupted. She wore a t-shirt with a deep field photograph of space printed across the front. Thousands of galaxies, each one a blur of ancient light. She looked at Michael. She did not react. Now understand what that means in the context of Michael Jordan's daily life. He had not walked through a public space without being recognized in over 2 decades. There were people who had cried at the sight of him. People who had frozen completely unable to speak. children who had grabbed their parents' arms and pointed. He had learned over many years to brace himself gently for that reaction, to hold himself steady while the recognition moved through whoever was in front of him. This girl gave him nothing. She looked at him the way you look at anyone who knocks on your door on a Tuesday morning when you are in the middle of something. With patience, with mild curiosity, without awe. She said simply, "Can I help you?" Her voice was calm and direct. It reminded him in its steadiness, in its quiet refusal to rush, of someone he had known a long time ago. He said, "I'm looking for Loretta Sims." Something shifted in the girl's expression. Not alarm. Something more like a door closing one careful inch. A small, protective adjustment in the eyes. She said, "Who should I say is asking?" He said, "Tell her it's Michael from Wilmington." The girl looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, "Wait here." She did not close the door all the way. She pulled it almost shut, leaving a thin slice of interior, just enough that Michael could hear footsteps moving away into the house. Then a muffled voice, then a pause, then another voice, lower and less clear, and then footsteps coming back. While he waited, Michael looked at the porch. He looked at the wind chime made of painted shells turning slowly in the October air. He looked at the flower boxes spilling over with late-season marigolds. He looked at a small doormat with a pattern of moons and stars worn soft by years of use. And then he looked at the child's bicycle leaning against the porch railing. It was small. A kid's bike. Purple with white handlebar grips and a small wire basket zip-tied to the front. The kind of bicycle that belongs to a child somewhere between 8 and 11 years old. He stared at it. He was still staring at it when the door opened fully. Loretta Mae Sims stood in the doorway. She was 44 years old. She had let her hair go fully natural, a crown of tight coils touched with silver at the edges, pulled back loosely with a dark clip. She wore a blue cardigan over a plain white shirt and reading glasses pushed up to the top of her head, the way people push their glasses when something has pulled them suddenly away from whatever they were reading. Her eyes were still the color of dark honey. Her face was the face he had known at 14 and 15 and 16 and 17, rearranged by time into something more settled, more certain of itself, the way a river looks when it has found its permanent banks. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The October air moved between them. The painted shells knocked softly together on the wind chime. Then she said, in the voice he had carried in his memory for 20 years, that slight, careful lowering when she was choosing her words. She said, "You got old." He said, "So did you." She said, "You look exactly the same." He said, "You look better." Something moved through her expression that was not quite a smile and not quite sadness, but lived in the space between them, the territory that belongs only to people who once knew each other very well and are now standing on the other side of a long silence trying to find where they are. She stepped back from the door. She said, "You should come in." He stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and old books and something warm from the kitchen. There were books on every surface, shelves along 2 walls, stacks on the side table by the door, a small tower on the corner of the couch. There were framed star charts on the walls, the kind with coordinates printed in small type along the edges. A professional-grade telescope stood near the front window, pointed at the sky. And on a small table just inside the door, there was a photograph in a wooden frame. Michael saw it as he stepped past and his feet slowed before he had told them to. It was Loretta younger, her 30s maybe, standing in front of a large observatory dome with a wide sky behind her. Beside her stood a man with a broad, warm smile and his arm around her shoulders. And beside the man, holding his hand, very small, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was a child. Michael's eyes moved from the photograph to the teenage girl, who had retreated to the far end of the hallway and stood watching him with those steady, measuring eyes. His mind went to the letter, to the 3 quiet sentences that had sent him to a storage unit floor for 45 minutes, to what Loretta had not told him on that last Friday night in November, 20 years ago. His mouth went dry. He turned to Loretta. She was watching him. She had watched him look at the photograph. She had watched him look at the girl. She had watched his face move through the arithmetic of it all. Slowly, the way a person does the math on something they are afraid to get wrong. The house was very quiet. Outside, the wind chime made its small shell-on-shell sound. When Michael spoke, the voice that came out of him was not the voice of 6 championship rings or a billion-dollar brand, or a man who had faced down pressure that would have crushed most people without breaking stride. It was the voice of a 17-year-old boy standing on a cold November sidewalk in Wilmington, reaching for words and finding nothing. He said, "Loretta." She said, "Yes." He said, "Is she?" And Loretta said quietly and completely, in the voice she always used when she was about to say something true and important, and had chosen every word with care, "Sit down, Michael." They sat at the kitchen table. The teenage girl, whose name Loretta told him quietly as she moved to put the kettle on, was Celeste, named after Loretta's mother, had gone upstairs without being asked. She had read the room the way only certain teenagers can, with a maturity that goes beyond their years, and she had disappeared. Somewhere above them, through the ceiling of the small kitchen, the faint sound of music moved through the floorboards like something heard from underwater. Loretta made coffee. She moved around her kitchen the way people move in spaces they have fully claimed, without thinking about it, without performing it, simply inhabiting it. Michael watched her the way you watch someone you once knew very well when you encounter them again after a long time. You are looking for 2 things at once. What is still the same? And what time has changed? Her hands were the same. The particular economy of her movements. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. That was the same too. But there was something in the way she carried herself now that was different from 17. A settledness. A quality of being completely at home inside her own life. The way a tree looks that has grown for many years in one place and stopped apologizing for the space it takes up. She set 2 mugs on the table and sat across from him. She said, "How did you find me?" He said, "I found your letter." She looked down at the mug between her hands. A pause. Then she said, almost to herself, "Your mother." He said, "She kept it all those years in a shoebox, at the bottom of a box of my old things. I found it in a storage unit this past October." Loretta was quiet for a moment. Outside on Camellia Drive, a car moved slowly past. The painted shells on the wind chime touched each other softly in the breeze. She said, "She was a good woman, your mother." He said, "The best one I ever knew." Another silence opened between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that belongs to people who once knew each other well enough that quiet was never something they needed to fill. Then Michael set his hands flat on the table and looked at her directly and said, "I want to ask you something, straight out, because you always deserved straightness from me and I did not always give it to you." She met his eyes and waited. He said, The letter said you had found out something 3 weeks before that last Friday night. You were going to tell me that evening. She did not look away. He said, "The girl, Celeste, is she?" Loretta set her mug down with a careful, deliberate movement. She said, "She is not yours, Michael." The words landed in the kitchen like something set down gently but firmly on a hard surface. He breathed. She said, "I need you to hear that clearly and completely before we go any further. Celeste is not your daughter. She is Randall's daughter, my husband's. Or she was... We adopted her when she was 3 years old, after we had been married for several years. She was in the foster system with no one coming for her. And we had the room and we had the love, and it was the clearest decision we ever made together." Michael said, "Was." She understood what he meant. She said, "Randall died 4 years ago. Heart attack. He was 51 and had never had a sick day that anyone knew about. And then one morning he was simply gone." Her voice stayed level through all of it. He recognized that levelness, not the absence of feeling, but feeling that has been worked through, the way metal gets worked until it is strong rather than brittle. He said, "I'm sorry, Loretta, genuinely." She said, "Thank you. He was a good man, the patient kind." A beat of quiet. He said, "Then what was it? The thing you found out 3 weeks before. What were you going to tell me that Friday night?" Loretta wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up. She said, "I was pregnant." The kitchen went very still. The music upstairs kept playing, soft and distant. She said, "I found out 3 weeks before that Friday. I was 17 years old and I was terrified, and I kept trying to find the right moment to tell you. And then that night came, and everything went sideways before I could get to it. And after you left, after the door closed, I decided I was going to carry it myself. Figure it out myself. I did not want to use it to pull you back." Michael's voice was very quiet. He said, "What happened?" She said, "I lost it. 12 weeks in. Early enough that no one outside my mother knew. And then I went to Chapel Hill that summer and I did what I said I was going to do. I studied, I worked, I built something." She paused. Then she said, "I met Randall in graduate school. He was kind and steady and he made me laugh, which I had not done easily for a while. We had a good life together, a real one." Michael sat very still. He said, "You went through all of that alone." She said, "Not alone. My mother was there. And then Randall." He said, "But I wasn't." One short word came back. "No." Not an accusation, not delivered with heat. Just a fact, placed between them plainly, the way Loretta had always handled hard truth, without decoration and without cruelty. He said, "I should have been." She said, "You were 17, I was 17. We were children trying to figure out enormous things." He said, "That doesn't make it right." She said, "No, but it makes it human." She looked at him steadily across the table. "Michael, I did not spend 20 years being angry at you. I was, for a while. Then I let it go. Carrying anger towards someone who has no idea you're carrying it is the loneliest thing there is. I chose not to be lonely that way." He said, "Then why didn't you reach out? You wrote in the letter that you weren't hard to find." She looked at him with something that was almost a smile. She said, "Were you looking?" He had no answer for that. She said, "You had an enormous life happening, Michael. I watched it sometimes from a distance. I was glad for you. That is the truth. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the folded letter, soft at the creases, gray from 20 years of being opened and refolded and carried, and placed it gently on the table between them. He said, "I came because I found this. Because I realized I had spent 20 years walking forward without once looking back. And I needed to look back, not to undo anything, not to ask for forgiveness or a second chance, just to see how things turned out." She looked at the letter on the table. Then she looked at him. Then she looked toward the window where the telescope stood, pointed at the October sky. She said simply, "Every day, I do it every day." He said, "You did it, Loretta, the stars." Something in her face opened slightly. Not a full smile, something quieter. The look of a person hearing something they already knew confirmed by someone they once loved. And something in Michael's face, something that had been held tight and carefully in place for a very long time, finally, quietly let go. You have been waiting for this, from the very first words of the story, from that black SUV rolling slowly down Camellia Drive on a Tuesday morning in October, from the folded piece of paper Michael kept reaching for in his pocket, from the moment we told you that what he found on the other side of that door shocked everyone. You have been waiting for this chapter. We kept that promise alive through 11 chapters. Through a boy sitting down in the grass without being invited. Through Library Tuesdays and Constellation Nights and a birthday card with lumpy hand-drawn stars. Through a Friday night in November that broke something quietly and completely. Through 20 years of silence and one letter in a shoebox that a mother kept because she understood that some things need time before they are ready to be found. Now we are here. And here is what shocked everyone. Not just Michael Jordan. Everyone. 6 days after Michael's visit to Camellia Drive, 6 days after he sat across the kitchen table from Loretta Mae Sims and heard the truth she had carried alone since she was 17 years old, Loretta received a phone call. It came from a lawyer she had never heard of, representing a foundation she recognized immediately. She thought it was a mistake, a misdial, something meant for someone else. It was not a mistake. On the 2-hour drive home from Camellia Drive that Tuesday, Michael had sat in the back seat of the SUV and said almost nothing. Devlin had driven and stayed quiet the way a good assistant stays quiet. Present, available, taking nothing for himself from a moment that did not belong to him. But Devlin had noticed things. He noticed the looseness around Michael's eyes that had not been there on the way down. He noticed the way Michael's shoulders sat differently. Lower, easier, the way a person's body changes when it has finally been allowed to put something down that it has been carrying for a very long time. He noticed that Michael looked, for the first time in the 3 years Devlin had worked for him, like a man who had finished something. Somewhere on those back roads winding through the gold October fields of North Carolina, Michael had made a decision. He had thought about the Camellia Sky Center, about a woman who had spent 30 years building something real and quiet and genuinely important, far from any spotlight, with no audience and no applause. Just the work itself and the love of the work, and the kids who showed up every semester wanting to understand the sky. He had thought about the aging telescope, about the education program running on a budget held together with grants and bake sales, and the stubborn goodwill of volunteers. About the waiting list, 240 children from underfunded schools who wanted to come and learn and look up, and could not simply because there was not enough money to bring them. He had thought about Celeste, 15 years old, answering the door with a pencil behind her ear and a galaxy on her shirt, looking at one of the most famous men alive without a flicker of recognition, because the things that mattered in her house were different things entirely. He had thought about a girl by a chain-link fence with a library book about stars and a yellow rubber band in her braids. He picked up his phone. He made a call. Michael Jordan's foundation made a donation to the Camellia Sky Center. It was not a small donation. It was large enough to fund the education program for 15 full years, large enough to replace the aging telescope with a new professional-grade instrument, large enough to build an additional classroom wing and bring on 2 full-time science educators to run it properly, large enough to take 240 children off the waiting list and bring every single one of them through the door. The donation was made quietly. No press release, no announcement, no cameras. It did not stay quiet. It never does with things like this. Someone talked. The suspicion, never confirmed, never denied, fell on Devlin, who was a professional in every visible way but who had sat in that car on Camellia Drive and watched something true and rare happen through a rearview mirror and was, beneath all his professionalism, a person with a considerable amount of heart. The story spread, first locally, then regionally. Then it caught the kind of current that certain stories catch when they carry enough truth in them. And it went national overnight. Michael Jordan had gone looking for his first girlfriend after 20 years of silence. He had found her running a stargazing center for children in a small North Carolina town. He had funded it. Quietly. Completely. Without asking for anything in return. The internet did what the internet does. It moved fast and loud and with enormous feeling. People posted and shared and cried in comment sections. Local television covered it. National programs picked it up. Opinion writers filled column inches asking what it meant, what it said about love and time and the debts we owe the people who shaped us before the world got to us. Loretta handled it the way she handled everything, with composure and without drama. She gave one statement to a journalist she trusted at the local paper. She said, "Michael Jordan and I knew each other a very long time ago. He is a generous man. The stars don't care much about any of this, but the kids who come here do. And that is all that matters." She did not call him after that. He did not call her. This story does not end with a romantic reunion. It does not end with 2 people in their 40s deciding to rewrite the past. That is not what this is. The past does not get rewritten. It gets understood if you are lucky, and set down and carried differently from that point forward. This story ends the following spring. On a clear night in April, Loretta Mae Sims stood inside the Camellia Sky Center and looked out at a room full of 240 children who had spent months on a waiting list and had finally, all of them, made it through the door. She walked them outside onto the observation deck where the new telescope waited. She pointed up at Orion, the hunter frozen among the stars, going his endless circle around the sky. And she told them the same story she had told a tall, skinny boy in the grass by a chain-link fence almost 30 years before. That Orion and Scorpius, enemies in the old stories, were placed on opposite sides of the sky so they would never have to face each other. That they circle the earth forever, going around and around, never catching each other, never quite meeting. And that this is not a tragedy. It is simply the shape of some things. 240 children looked up at the same sky, and somewhere across the dark on the other side of it, Orion kept moving. Patient, endless, still there. And that is the story of Michael Jordan and Loretta Mae Sims. A boy who sat down in the grass without being invited. A girl who told him about the stars. A letter kept in a shoebox for 20 years. And a quiet act of kindness that nobody asked for and nobody expected. That changed 240 children's lives forever. Before you go, drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from right now. It could be your bedroom at midnight, a commute on a crowded train, a lunch break at your desk. Wherever you are, we want to know. This community comes from every corner of the world, and every single comment reminds us why we do this. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about someone you lost touch with, or a letter you never sent, or a kindness you could still do for someone who least expects it, please hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps this story reach someone out there who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that kindness deserves to be heard by more people, subscribe to this channel. Every subscriber is one more person in a community that chooses to slow down, pay attention, and share the stories that actually matter. Spread kindness. It costs nothing, and it echoes further than you think. And now, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. We picked it especially for you. We think you are going to love it. We will see you there.